Hi, folks. I see people are joining us, and we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Nonprofit Leadership, a training for Vermont nonprofit childcare program leaders. I'm Luann Beninati. I'm the Director of Program Viability Strategies at Let's Grow Kids. And on behalf of Let's Grow Kids, I'm here to welcome you and to cover some of the housekeeping details for this session. We have a good-sized group on tonight, and all participants are muted. We do still want your participation in the session. The presenters were able to incorporate questions that some of you provided during registration into the presentation. Thank you for those. And the Q&A box will be monitored throughout the session so that you can ask questions or make comments. There'll be time throughout the evening to address those. This is part one of 2 sessions. Tonight is for directors, executive directors, and staff, leadership staff of programs, and board members. And on October 6th, there'll be a session for executive directors, program leaders only. Programs that have representation at both evenings will be eligible for a limited number of one-time consultations offered by our presenters. Directors who are on tonight and other staff will be automatically registered for October 6th, and a link will be sent out for others who might want to join, and Maria will add it into the chat box at the toward the end of the session if you want to send it out to any of your colleagues. We are pleased to offer professional development hours through Northern Lights for this session. Staff members of programs who would like professional development hours through Northern Lights will need to stay on for the full session, and we will submit your attendance for hour credit. This is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be available for folks to look back on, or for folks, colleagues that might be interested and were not able to make it tonight, will be available to them on the Let's Grow Kids website and on sharedservicesvermont.org soon after we're done with the presentation. So we have plenty to cover in a short time tonight, so let's begin. First, I want to say we're always grateful to Maria, our colleague at Let's Grow Kids, who's here with us tonight, and she's managing the back of the session. We don't see Maria, but she's there, and she keeps us connected to technology, and we always appreciate her. And I'm pleased to introduce our facilitator, Brenda Metzler. Brenda has been actively engaged in early childhood education for almost 30 years as a teacher, as a program director, and as a program mentor, as well as currently supporting programs on the ground as a community program support specialist at Let's Grow Kids. And our presenter, Dr. Jane Van Buren. Jane is the founding director of Noonmark Services, located in Burlington, Vermont. Noonmark has many years of experience leading nonprofit organizations spanning the globe. Noonmark has worked in a variety of capacities with numerous nonprofits in Vermont, including the Janet Munt Family Room, the Vermont Brewers Association, Vermont Works for Women, and the Chittenden County Court Division. Jane's extensive experience in nonprofit management and consulting has spanned decades, focusing on many crucial aspects of organizational development. Thanks to both of you for leading this evening, and I'm happy to hand it over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Luann. Hello, everybody. I just need to acknowledge that this is very strange for you to see me and I can't see you, but I'm just going to go on faith that you are actually looking at me and everything's okay. That was a nice introduction, and I don't have much to add to that, except that I am also the very part-time executive director of Child Care Resource. And some of you know me from that arena. So before we begin, since I've been introduced, but you haven't, I was take a quick poll. You could tell me, just check a box whether you're from a board or from the staff. And that way we will know who's in the room in terms of there it is right there. So just take a quick one. Are you representing the board, or are you representing the staff of your organization? So I don't know how this works, Maria. Do I get to see it, or does it just?
Yeah, when everybody's voted, then I end the poll and you should be able to see the results.
Okay. So while you're doing that, let me also just say that this was really intended to be a high-level overview of nonprofits and nonprofit leadership. We're going to cover board's roles, staff, executive director roles. We're going to cover, you'll see in a minute, the agenda, but it's not detailed. It's a high level overview. And I know many of you have questions, and if we don't get to them, we perhaps will have time at the end or during the session for question and answers. But if not, please feel free to take advantage of the 30-minute or the short consult with me that's included as part of this training. So there we go. Okay, great. So 10 of you are from boards and 17 are from staff. So that's good, good. Okay, thank you. So how come I can't? The agenda, sorry. The agenda is these 5 pieces are what we're going to cover. And I want to put us all on the same page by starting with what's a nonprofit organization, just the basic of what it means to be a nonprofit. What financial, legal, and values are really attached to being a nonprofit. We'll talk a little bit about mission, vision, and values, and then we'll move into governance and relationships and roles. At the end of each one of these sessions, there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And, you know, as Luann said, we have an awful lot to cover and not a whole lot of time. I know it's going to go by quickly. So again, if we don't get a chance to get to all of your questions, there will be other opportunities for you to be asking those. So to start, in this, I'm not going to go through all of them, don't worry, but I wanted to give you a sense that a nonprofit is really a tax status. It's, you know, the 501c3 that you hear bantered about, that's a tax code. It doesn't mean anything except that you have met the charitable, religious, or educational purpose. And I'm assuming that most of you are 501c3s, which means that your organization has, in addition to incorporating in the state of Vermont, has gone on to fill out the extensive paperwork with the IRS to demonstrate to them that you are deserving of tax status that excludes you from having to pay income tax on the income that you are earning as a nonprofit. And there are many other things too, which we'll get to, but that's, I just wanted to give you a sense of how many, and this isn't all of them, but how many nonprofit tax codes there are. The C3 is the only one that people can give money to and then deduct it from their personal income tax. So we like those. So as a C3, you have met those purposes, a charitable, religious, scientific, educational, etc. Most social nonprofits that we know of are C3s. You get the favorable tax treatment. And all of you are either considered a public charity, a private operating foundation, or a private non-operating foundation. So we don't need to get into the difference of all of those, but an operating foundation is one that gives money out, and non-operating does not. It funds its own activities. As a C3, you have restrictions on lobbying. So you absolutely have every responsibility to lobby if you so choose. It's not forbidden, but there are some restrictions on it. You also have some restrictions on unrelated business income, and probably with childcare that might come into play every once in a while, depending on where you're getting your money from. And self-dealing, meaning you can't sell stock, you can't promote the organization in a way that benefits the individuals involved other than fairly compensating them. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly, so sorry if it's too much, but you'll have this to look at later. So the main areas, the main areas of distinction are these legal, economic, mission orientation, and culture and norms. You know, there are exceptions to these, so we will review these right quickly. So legal characteristics is not for making a profit. That doesn't mean that you can't have a healthy fund balance. In fact, you are probably all striving to have a healthy fund balance. It does mean that, I'm just trying to get us out of the way. Okay, it does mean that you can't, for instance, charge tuition that will give you a profit other than a fund balance. You're making money to run your organization. The non-distribution constraint, this means that if your child care center goes out of business, you cannot then look at all of your and it to the board members and the staff. It's organization. And you're privately controlled, which means that you are a private nonprofit organization, you're a corporation, and you're typically by a board of directors that are citizens. And that's the rub. So that's what we're going to be getting into as we go through these areas. That's the legal characteristic. So what does all this mean? This means that you can't raise equity capital. You can't issue stock. I've already talked about this a little bit. You can't offer profit sharing to staff. So that's a big difference between a nonprofit organization and a for-profit organization that's publicly run. So has big implications for the board and the staff, because you are receiving tax exempt status, which means in essence that the taxpayers are supporting you. So you're answerable to them. The public is accountable to whatever your public is, however you have defined your public. You have a great deal of oversight from state regulators, and in the state of Vermont, some states have the Attorney General has more oversight, but in the state of Vermont, it's the Secretary of State, and also, of course, the Internal Revenue Service is very interested in what you're doing, and you need to be accountable to them. Funding sources. Not all of you are getting grant money, but the typical funding sources for nonprofits are grants, private contributions. I'm sure you all do some kind of fundraising or donor drives, and that's where money will come from individuals. And the bulk of your funding, I'm guessing, is coming from tuition, from whether the state's paying it or subsidizing it, or whether people are privately paying it. And then if you're in a position to be able to invest your fund balance, then you're getting some income from investments, which is always very nice. So here, this is just a slide that is old, but it's one of the problems with the nonprofit sector is that it's really hard to get data. When you all file your 990 tax forms already, that information is a good 6 to 9 to 12 months late. Past. You're not late in filing it. It's just, we're always sort of trying to catch up with data in the nonprofit sector. So I just wanted you to see that the majority of the money coming into nonprofit organizations across the country are fees for service. And so you are right there at the top there in terms of where you're getting your income from. That's how most nonprofit organizations get their income. And of course, we are throwing into this graph colleges, universities, healthcare, hospitals, and so of course they're going to be getting a lot of money from their services. Foundations, corporations, individuals, and bequests. I just wanted to also give you a sense of how much money is coming in through those. In 2018, as you see right here, $427.71 billion were contributed to nonprofit organizations in the United States. And that came from you and me, from foundations, businesses, and people who leave money to nonprofits in their wills. So I know I'm going very quickly, and we're going to stop in just a minute here. So mission orientation, and I don't want you to think that I don't think that for-profit businesses have missions, because I know they do. And now there's these corporations, these B Corps that are popping up that are very much mission driven. But I will argue that nonprofits have been defined by their mission for a lot longer than any other of the other than government and private have been defined longer than those. And it really is what drives a nonprofit organization. And we'll get into this too in a bit in terms of board and organizational life cycles, but nonprofits have typically been founded because there was a need identified in the community. A passion for something that was missing, that filling a gap. And so the mission is very important to nonprofits. However, it does have a pretty large effect on management and on key management decisions. For instance, performance evaluation. So your missions can be somewhat vague. How do you evaluate your outcomes? How do you know if your mission is to stop teen pregnancy and you have 2 teens that don't get pregnant? Is that an outcome that's evaluated? Or it gets very unclear about how to evaluate your outcomes. It also plays into competition. You know, are you competing for donors and with other organizations? And yes, you are. And so are you trying to then find a good match between, you know, does your mission resonate with a donor? Or will your competition's mission resonate more? So it really plays into competition in marketing. And then human resource management, I think that typically people have been hired because they have a passion for the mission and not necessarily a skill set. I think that's less and less true, but that's certainly been the case in the past. You know, the old joke is you start as a entry-level social worker and within a month you're an executive director, but I really do think that that's changing and has changed in the years that I've been involved in the nonprofit sector. We've gotten much more professional in terms of thinking about necessary skills to manage the organization. However, culture and norms, and I think this has changed, but it's fundamental. Sacrifice versus rewards. You know, I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it to change the world. I'm in it to, you know, make this community a better place. And I think that's carried over in terms of what we think in terms of nonprofit salaries. Passion and commitment versus skills and effectiveness or effectives. Again, the same thing, you know, I'm committed to this organization and you know, yeah, I don't really know how to manage it, but I know I see the need in the community and I'm passionate about it. Need versus opportunity. Again, this is a big difference, I think, with the for-profit world, where they might see an opportunity to make a profit. We see an opportunity to fill a need. Process and consensus versus quick decision-making. Oh my goodness, this happens so much in the nonprofit sector that, you know, sometimes these board meetings go on forever because there's so much process and then reach consensus, which I totally am not opposed to consensus, but it does mean that decisions aren't quick. And yes, sometimes that really, really confuses and frustrates the for-profit world because they want you to make a decision and you say, well, I've got to take it back to my board. You know, and it's a longer process than what they would like you to have. Compassionate employment versus performance-based employment. Again, that's kind of the same as the above bullet. You know, if someone really is trying hard, we might keep them on even if they aren't performing the best that they could be. In lean program orientation versus building capacity and support systems. I have seen this many, many times in nonprofit organizations, particularly small ones, that the vision is pretty short-sighted and the money coming in goes right into program as opposed to creating a support in the infrastructure that the organization needs to keep them moving through through a strategic future. Political and funding considerations versus program impact. So that's kind of the cartoon before is, you know, if something is politically expedient or if there's people willing to give you money, you know, you might be looking at that and it might be taking you off your mission and creating a different program and lessening the impact of your current programs. So I'm going to slow down in a minute. I just want to get through these first slides to kind of bring us all on the same page. So, you know, all organizations have a life cycle and nonprofits do the same as anybody else. So one of the things with this slide and the next one I want you to think about is, where are you? Where's your nonprofit right now? You know, the beginning is the idea, oh, let's create a childcare center. We really need one in this part of Burlington or this part of Vermont. And so there's all this enthusiasm and there's startup and you grow and you get kids and you become well known, and then there's sometimes a decline. You know, something happens, the director leaves, the board turns over, whatever it is, and then you have a choice. And the next slide shows that better, I think. You know, the choice is, do we dissolve or do we recreate ourselves? You know, and this doesn't always happen, but this is what the typical nonprofit life cycle looks like. You expand, you stabilize, you have influence in the in the community, and then you have to decide, okay, are we going to recreate ourselves? What's our strategic plan? How are we going to be sustainable? How are we going to continue our impact? are we declining? And so these are all areas that a board of directors, it's a good place for them to be thinking strategically about where the organization's headed. So, any questions on that section before we move into mission, vision, and values? I know that I went through it quickly. I'm just note that I want to spend more time on the rest of the presentation, so I wanted to make sure we were on the same page. So Brenda, do we have any questions?
We don't. So, and I realized that we didn't say at the outset, and there was no way that you would know when we're going to pause. So what I'm going to do, and I just did now, and I'll do this as we go through the rest of Jane's presentation. I am going to I'll write a little note to everyone in the chat box that says, please enter any of your questions into the Q&A box. And then as those come in, I will share them at the intervals where we pause. And right now, because you didn't have that information ahead of time very long, you may not have formulated your questions yet. But I imagine you're making notes, and please, when you, I feel like so you're captivating me, Jane. So I'm like so attentive to what you're saying that I don't want to tear myself away to type something in.
Okay.
And so I almost like didn't make it into the chat box. But so if that's how you're finding yourself, like jot it down in the, in your little pad that you have before you, and get it into the Q&A when you can. And then at some point, I'll ask those of Jane, and we'll answer as many as we can directly in real time. And we will capture all of your questions and answer all of them, even if we can't do it in real time.
Okay.
And if I could just dive in really quickly, because there's no question, so I'm going to jump right in as a former executive director, as a board member, as someone who loves this conversation. That culture and norm slide for me is so amazing. And I think it's one that folks are going to want to revisit when they have a copy of this in their own hands. To me, it could almost be used as a board evaluation or a program evaluation tool. I love it. So I just had to say that.
All righty. So yeah, sorry we didn't talk about the Q&A piece beforehand, so feel free. And as Brenda said, I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. So this next section on vision, mission, and values is pretty quick, because this is the core of what the board should be talking about. What do we believe in? What is this organization all about? And so the work that a board and staff can take together to talk this through, to think about the vision, to think about how, what are the values that really drive the work that we do in our relationships with one another, and what's the mission through which all of our decisions sort of get pushed as a sieve through our mission. So I'm going to go through these, but this is really your work that you need to do, I think, as an organization, particularly if you have a new board, so that you can bring everybody together. So you can read this, but a mission is the action, cause, and the impact. So if you have a mission that's not telling you what you do and who you're doing it for and why you're doing it, then I would suggest that you need to go back and revisit that mission and answer those questions. Because the mission, everybody should know, and I think the next slide talks about that. Yeah, what's the mission of your nonprofit? Does it need to be revised? And are you aware of it? Can you repeat it? Some organizations have it, put on poster boards all over the organization. It's at every board meeting. Make sure that that's the true of your organization, and that it really resonates as well, because it's the mission that's going to bring parents and children into your center. It's also going to bring people, donors and grants into your center. Vision. What are you going to do that's going to change community? Why is it going to be a better place because you're there and that what you've done? So if you are successful in your mission, then what's going to be what is the community going to look like? Where do you want to end up? Same question here. Can you repeat it? Do you know what it is? Is this something that the board can take some time I would suggest putting it on an agenda item, for the board to have these conversations. And values. What makes you different? How do you know when you'll reach the mission? How do you get your work done? How do you relate to one another? You know, what are the values, the core values of your organization so that it builds a positive work culture and people will want to work for you and stay there. Again, this is a good meeting agenda, and it shouldn't be done in the vacuum of just the board. It should be done, I would argue, in collaboration with senior staff, if not all staff. So it's a good opportunity if you think about having a retreat. These are the key conversations that build team in your organization and really get people engaged in what the work of the organization is. So that's a quick, oh, that's the same question. That's just quick to put that on your radar and to have you think about, whoa, it's really been a long time since we've thought about what our vision is or what our mission is. Maybe it's something that you put on a board agenda every year to revisit to make sure that it's still the same, that it still makes sense to you. So any questions about that piece before we go into governing boards?
So we do have one question that sort of harkens back to the first set of slides, and I'd like to just slip it in now. And then, because I imagine there are going to be other questions generated as you go along. And this is, are there any differences in how nonprofits function if they are religious and do not have 501(c)(3) status due to the age of the church that owns them?
I guess I'm not quite sure what the question is. A difference legally or, you know, there are very big differences legally and financially for organizations that are not C3s. And religious organizations have a whole different set of tax considerations. So yes, there are differences in how nonprofits function depending on the tax status that they have, or if indeed they don't have IRS tax status, then there's a difference there too. So I think what I would love to do is talk further with whoever asked that question so I can understand the context, because there are different layers to the answer.
Right, it has multiple parts. So I'll capture that, and thank you for entertaining it now.
Sure. Okay, everybody take a deep breath. We're going into governing boards. So why do we even have boards? You know, you talk to a lot of executive directors, pardon board members, but they're like, this is just, why do I have a board? They're just getting in my way. Well, nonprofits have a board for many reasons. Number one, and most importantly, is that you have to. It's required by law. In the state of Vermont, when you filed your articles of incorporation, they wanted to know, who are your board members? You know, you are required at least to have 3 in the state of Vermont. The IRS will also want to look at who you have on your board. The other reason is that a well-functioning board and staff rely on one another for advice and counsel. You go to the board when you have a situation you don't quite know how to handle, and you would hopefully receive their advice and counsel. And we'll get into a little bit later in further slides. You know, it has to be a relationship where the board is giving you advice, not dictating what you should be doing. But we'll get into that later. Provide oversight and accountability, and we will definitely talk about this. The board is charged with some very clear oversight and accountability responsibilities, primarily because you are accountable to the public. You don't have an owner, and so you need to, the public is relying on the board of directors to govern the organization in a financially and legal sound way. The board has a big responsibility, as we just went through, to help determine the organizational purpose, the mission and the vision. And then the other thing is that your connection with the ownership. And I know in childcare centers, frequently the connection to the ownership is pretty clear because you have children, a lot of the board members have children in the program or alumni of the program. And that creates its own set of interesting challenges for the childcare world. And board members are ambassadors in the community. So when you're out and about, you're talking about the organization so that people know who you are. So that's why they're there. So this is just real quick so you see that it is required by Vermont law. And I put this slide in because you can go to the internet and look at the Vermont Nonprofit Corporation law if you ever have any questions. But that's just there for prove that I'm right. So guiding principles of governance. These are in my many years of working in the nonprofit sector, and I've served on boards. I continue to serve on boards, and I have been executive director and senior staff in nonprofit organizations. These are what I believe, that boards exist to be accountable that the organization works. What that means is that the board is there to make sure that everything is legally, morally, financially, ethically working. That things are the way they should be on all of those aspects. So you have that high level of accountability. That does not mean that the board has to control everything. It doesn't mean that the board needs to get into, what are you paying in terms of your phone bill? It just means that the board has to have this higher level of accountability. So the board should control all it must rather than all it can. So think about that. What does that mean? When we get through this, you'll see as we go through these slides, there are things that the board should absolutely control, but it doesn't mean that they have to control everything that they can. So we'll talk about that some more as we go through. Confidence or the ignorance of a trusting board may lead to rubber stamping. And I'm sure that you've all had some experience with that, okay, we really trust this executive director, therefore we're just gonna agree with everything he or she says. And then the zeal or consciousness of a board may lead to micromanaging. And that's really the trickiest thing for a board to sort of figure out where those boundaries are and when you're moving from control to micromanagement. So those are all areas which we'll talk about in a little bit that board members need to pay attention to. So I love this slide. I'm sorry, it doesn't look like it's a little cut off at the top. These are the different kinds of boards, and it fits pretty closely to the life cycle of a nonprofit organization sometimes. So the coveralls board, that's in the beginning when you've got directors that are giving you lots of time and they're focused on building the organization. They're the founders of the organization. They're really planning everything day to day. There's no staff. And then you've got shirt sleeves where the board is really rolling up its sleeves. People sometimes call that a working board. This board is still pretty focused on the operations and on day-to-day planning. You start bringing some new people in, and fundraising is really looking at special events and grants. And maybe you have a part-time person that you're paying. And then blue suit and black tie is really moving into a more sophisticated board where I'm thinking probably most of you are somewhere in between there, that you have boards that have directors on there who are willing to plan and to think not just on the day-to-day, but really focus on the governance of the organization. You have more new people, you're starting to get individual money from fundraising, and in your case would be tuition. And you absolutely have to have a staff. And then the black tie is really when you start having specialized staff and you have different people on the board, you start to diversify and the planning becomes much more strategic. So it's just a fun slide to think about where you might be or where you want to get to. And it doesn't necessarily have, if you're 20 years old and you feel like you're not at black tie or blue suit, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's really more of the, what am I trying to say? It's not so much the age of the organization, but the focus of the organization and the focus of the people on the board.
Jane, this
Yeah.
is Luann. Quickly, before you go on, I just want to clarify on this slide, on the left side, directors is referring to directors on the board, not the staff, the executive director. I just wanted to, because in childcare, we talk about the executive director and then board members often, and I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. No, it's definitely talking about board directors. So there are three mindsets for board members that we talk about. One is strategic, one is generative, and one is fiduciary. And we're going to get into each of those. But I want you to notice that the words that are not there, like management and operations, those are not one of the mindsets that we typically want to see in a well-functioning board of director, individual members of the board. So fiduciary, what does that mean? Means that to hold in trust. If you look up the word fiduciary in the dictionary, that's what you'll see, to hold in trust. So that means that you, as board members, you're the trustees of the organization. That's exactly where that word comes from. And you have to exercise the due diligence to make sure that everything is well managed. So it's your fiduciary responsibility as a board member to make sure that everything is, as I said before, legally, financially, ethically, morally sound. Strategic. You are making big decisions about the organization. So you as a board are thinking strategically about the resources and where the organization is headed. And this slide says that the board is responsible for creating and monitoring the strategic plan. And I think I'd like to add to that, that when I was thinking about it before we started, that it's really a joint board staff. If you're thinking about having a strategic plan, it's a board staff responsibility to create the strategic plan and monitor it. It's generally, there might be a section of the strategic plan that talks about governance, and then it's therefore the responsibility of the board to implement that part. But generally, strategic plans are implemented by staff. Generative. You want to have a board that's really interested in what's going on in the world around you. You know, what's going on in the community that's affecting children in childcare, what's going on in the state that's affecting the way that people, the way that parents are paying for childcare. You know, really be thinking about deeper level about what's going on, what's the external environment is so important, particularly in childcare, and particularly now during a pandemic, that you really as a board are hoping, I would be hoping as a board that you're beginning to really get into sort of deeper issues so that you can support the staff through all of the changes and help them rise to the occasion in a way that they don't have time to. You know, they don't have time to do this sort of deeper thinking, but the board should. So this is just a slide of traditional governance. There are so many different ways that one can organize an organization, and this is not set in stone. In fact, I have lots of things that I'll talk about this, but the most important thing is, I think, the relationship between the board president and the executive director. If that relationship is not solid, then all the rest of this and this slide is really not going to work very well. That's my opinion in my years of looking at all of this. One problem, I think that there's nothing wrong with committees. I'm not going to argue against committees. I will say that having a strong executive committee, typically I have found that runs into problems because it tends to marginalize the rest of the board. I call it a board within a board. So if you have an executive committee that's meeting before every board meeting and then sort of rehashing what they've talked about at the board meeting, you're going to start having board members who feel sort of, why am I there? You know, why am I even here if all the decisions are being made beforehand in executive committee? My guess is that that's probably not the case with many of you, because who has time for that these days? But I have seen that happen. The other thing to think about when you're looking at this slide is, are these board committees or are they staff committees? And we don't have time to go into a lot of that right now, but you know, I would say that something like the fundraising committee is going to be a fairly staff-driven committee. Recruitment means recruitment of board members, and that's a board committee. Finance would be a joint board staff committee. So it's up to you to think about how your organization works. And I'm going to show you a bunch of slides that maybe give you some ideas. It does not have to look like this. But if it does look like this, I want you to think about what the responsibilities of each of these committees are. And are people aware of that? Are the board members aware of what their responsibilities are within those committees vis-a-vis work that staff is doing? Because this is where some of the micromanagement might run in, because you're working with staff on the committees and you start to really want to do the job of the staff or want to direct the staff, and that's not the intent of board committees. Sorry, this slide's a little blurry, but this is another idea, another way to look at at board governance, that it's all shared, and it's, you know, a Venn diagram of different responsibilities that are shared. And then underneath it are the different areas of the organization. So this is a much more collaborative, perhaps, structure. So this is a slide for you to think about. Board engagement at the bottom, CEO engagement along the left. And, you know, the idea, of course, is that you want high CEO engagement as well as high board engagement, so that the board engages a constructive partnership with the CEO. That, you know, I can't say that enough how important that is. And things will go south quickly if the board chair and the executive director are not seeing eye to eye on different things. So I don't need to read all this. You can look at it as, you know, in your own time, but that, I think, is what you're aiming for, is the governance as leadership. So here's a question. We're going to take another poll, but so what I've been talking about, and this is another slide, that the board of directors assumes legal responsibility for the organization, and the executive director manages the daily operations of the organization. So a quick poll, do you think that's an effective structure or ineffective structure? Getting some answers, Maria? Okay, I'm just dying to know why people are answering the way they are, but we can talk about that in a bit. If we have time, we can get into why people think it's either effective or ineffective. Okay, let's close it. Okay, I'm going to slow down a little bit now because I just saw that we have 45 minutes left, and so that's good. Governing documents. Again, broad overview, what are they? Bylaws. The bylaws are the document that really lets you know how you are structured, how you as a board are structured, when your meetings, how your meetings have to be structured, how your officers are structured, you know, what the responsibilities are of the board. And if you are not familiar with your bylaws, you need to be. Another governing document is the Articles of Incorporation. If you've been around for a long time, you know, they're probably dusty sitting in a file somewhere. This really are just to refer back to how were we originally thinking about incorporation. Conflict of interest policy. This is right up there, number 3. In fact, I would put it above the articles, although the articles are necessary, particularly if you have parents who are on the board with children in program. There is inherently in that some kind of conflict of interest, and that is going to be something that you as a board need to work hard at in terms of checking your agenda at the door and thinking about the overall good of the organization rather than what affects your child. And that's really hard. There's no getting around that. But every board member should sign a conflict of interest policy, which is a little bit different from what I'm talking about. A conflict of interest policy is really for you to disclose what other organizations you're involved in. You know, if your wife is a lawyer and you want her to do the work of the organization, is there inherent conflict of interest in that? What I was talking about before was really more conflict of agenda, that you really need to be sure that you have the best interests of the organization. You should have a whistleblower protection policy. In fact, many foundations, if you're applying for grants, are asking for that now. You should also have a gift exception policy. What are you going to do if somebody gives you stock? What about if someone gives you real estate? You should know in advance what your answer to those questions are going to be. Policy for board approval of executive compensation. That is the only compensation you as a board are responsible for. So you need to know how you're going to be approving that every year. Is it something that happens every year? Is it based on certain expectations? You know, just how are you going to be doing that? And the other key part of governing documents are your minutes. Obviously, I'm sure you're all taking minutes. They must be recorded. You will find also that people are going to be, people might ask for your board minutes, people meeting foundations or state funders might want to look at your board meeting minutes. So that is a short list of governing documents, and I want you to look at this slide to look at the hierarchy of them. So look at what's at the bottom. That's what I think is what I want to bring your attention to. The budget, way at the bottom. The committee charters and job descriptions, really at the bottom. Those are not governing documents. The governing documents are the ones that we just talked about that are really governing the operation of the board. You are the governors of this organization, and these are the documents that control your, not your behavior, but your activities. The strategic plan, the budget, and job descriptions are, with the exception of committee, but staff job descriptions, the budget and strategic plan are really very entwined in staff work. And they're really staff plans, particularly the budget is a staff plan, because the staff, you have a role perhaps in approving it, but it's the staff that implements the budget. And it's really their plan on how they're going to be operationalizing the organization for the year. So any questions on all of that?
Fantastic questions. I also just wanted to make a comment. One of the participants noted that in childcare, so you talked about the responsibility of the board, all you know, the moral, the ethical, the legal, the fiduciary, or the financial responsibility. And one participant noted that in childcare, the board, not the staff or the executive director, are considered the licensee, with legal responsibility for compliance with the regulations, the childcare regulations as well.
Right, thank you, that's a great point, yep.
Yes, and then, so to some of the questions, I think one person wanted to comment on their answer with the, when you asked about, when you took the last poll about, do we think this is a good model or not? And I'm not sure what that person's answer was, so I'm just going to invite the participant who said I wanted to comment with my answer to give me a little more information in the Q&A box, and we'll go with that. And the questions, so do you have suggestions for other trainings or reading for board members who are passionate about the organization, but maybe not particularly educated or savvy about board roles and regulations and rules?
Oh, there's an awful lot out there on board roles and responsibilities. I have at the end of this presentation, there's a short resource list, which you'll see, but I'm also happy to send some resources along. You know, in terms of trainings, in local trainings in Vermont, there really aren't that many anymore. I think that Common Good Vermont used to have some. I'm not sure what's going on with them now.
They still have, I would just interject that they still have some resources online, but I'm not aware of any trainings currently. But carry on, and then I can see that Luann and I both have some additional comments on that.
Right, I mean, I think that a lot of the resources now are online. There used to be more trainings happening around the state, but I'm not sure. Maybe Let's Grow Kids has some, maybe Marlboro College has some, but that's no longer here. So, but I'm happy to share resources that I have.
Yes, so I think that Luann would like to talk about Shared Services Vermont, and I will also, I'll let her tell you about that. I would also just say that, Jane, interestingly, this topic has come up so often in my work as a community and program support specialist and to early childhood community around the state. And so you are now sort of like we're just founding it. This is the first one because we realize that it's such an important and necessary topic that's why we reached out to you. So thank you for getting this going. We hope that that this will be the kind of thing that people say we want more of, and that we can continue to develop it. So we're thrilled to have you. And Luann, you want to talk about shared services?
And I would just add that I would suggest you will be able to access a copy of the PowerPoint, and I would use it as a tool to share with board members, especially those inexperienced board members that you're referring to in your question. I think that you could take a couple of pages out of this presentation and hand them right to as a part of a board orientation process, which it really is a part of the an important part of an effective board is having that good orientation for the board members. Yes, and Brenda was leading me to also remind you all that sharedservicesvermont.org, which is the online shared services resource for all of you who work in regulated childcare programs in Vermont, can have access to. There are a number of great resources around program management, including nonprofit board and executive director roles. So go to the program management section on sharedservicesvermont.org for some additional resources as well.
And one of the things, so there will be, as Jane mentioned, a list of resources at the end of this PowerPoint, and you'll get the PowerPoint very shortly after we're finished. But also, we're hoping that out of these conversations with all of you, that we will add to the resources in Shared Services Vermont and continue professional development as well. So, Jane, you have opinions about whether community members should be invited to participate in committees to help offset some of the heavy lifting from the board.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really good way to bring people in who don't have enough time to give to board service or might be trying to figure out if they want to be on the board. I think I've seen that work really well, particularly in finance committees. If you need a CPA, but you can get one to come just to the finance meetings, that's a really good way to bring them in. Yes, I think you don't want to just sort of go out on the street and bring anybody in. You need, the same sort of vetting you would do for any board member you would do for someone from the community who wants to serve on a committee.
Right, seek the expertise you need. Thank you. Would you say more about why you would view the fundraising committee as primarily a staff committee? Any ideas about how to engage staff in this committee and the expectation of time commitment outside of their regular work hours and duties?
Oh, okay. There are about 5 questions in that one.
I sort of feel the pain of the executive director who asked this question.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, let me try to answer. And I think I was probably too quick in terms of thinking about the size of your organization. I think that's particularly if you have a larger organization and have enough staff, which I'm sure none of you do. So I apologize if I went to thinking that maybe you had someone on staff who could be in charge of fundraising and not in charge of little kids. So sorry about that. But the role of fundraising is really key to a board, but in my experience, they need somebody from the staff to help them get going and to maintain their involvement in fundraising. So again, I can talk later offline about that, but you really need a staff person who is going to help carry the torch because it's an unusual board where the board is responsible for all the fundraising.
And in terms of childcare programs in Vermont, that tends to be the director.
Yeah.
It's not, when we're talking about staff responsibilities and these kind of things, we're not talking about the assistant teacher in the infant room or the infant teacher. We're talking about the staff person who's in the administrative role. And some programs do have directors and assistant directors or program directors, but by and large, we've got one administrative person leader in each program. And so it is part of their role to help shepherd the fundraising. And
that's true of every small community nonprofit. The ED has to wear all of these different hats and has absolutely not enough time for most of them. But fundraising's tricky. Fundraising's a really tricky area. And I think if you have a clear strategic plan and a clear development plan that shows what's going to happen every month and who's going to be doing what, it's a lot easier to help the board and the executive director work through what needs to be done to bring money in.
I would add one thing to that. If you can no, it should be connected to your mission. So when you connect it to your mission, then it makes sense to everybody. The staff say, oh, I understand, I can get behind that. And I think that as early childhood educators, we've become very, very creative when it comes to raising fund, doing fundraisers. I want to slip in one more question and then we'll get back to the slides. And this one says, can you say more about the budget and if staff or board should have more ownership over it? I assume this applies to financial reporting. Can you be specific about board treasurer's role versus staff, hired accountants, etc.?
Again, this might vary depending on the size of the organization and the skill of the staff. But my opinion is that the treasurer should work with whoever, probably the executive director, work closely with the executive director in terms of looking at financials every month and then reporting those financials to the board. The treasurer of the board should not get involved in QuickBooks or involved in micromanaging what the executive director is doing, but simply be looking at the big picture of the financials and working with the executive director to really highlight cash flow problems. If the executive director relies on the treasurer for a certain amount of expertise, then they need to be really clear about where the boundaries are. And because it really is the executive director's responsibility to take care of the finances of the organization. It's the treasurer's responsibility to oversee that process. But that does not mean that the treasurer is in the office working on QuickBooks. And I'm being very general, and it might work differently in organizations, but as long as that boundary is clearly respected between who's doing the work and who's overseeing it, then that's, the treasurer definitely has a fiduciary responsibility, but it's the executive director's role to, I would think, to prepare the financial statements and bring them to the treasurer for review or for discussion.
Thank you.
Are we good then to go forward?
Yes, thank you.
So this next session is on what to look for, what to watch for. So let me get rid of that. Time on the trivial. And the example I always give, and which is why this picture is here, is that board members that spend too much time talking about what color to paint the infant room, rather than paying more attention to what's going on in the larger area. So being really focused on items that they don't need to be focused on instead of the more strategic external items. And I think this happens because board members are not sure about their role. Mm-hmm. What they are sure is that they like blue in the infant room. So they kind of tend to go to that lowest common denominator because they're not exactly sure about what else they should be thinking about. So the point of these kinds of training is to help board members think about, okay, I really need to be thinking at a higher level. Short-term bias. Boards are really responsible for having a long-term view. And, but frequently they talk about what's happened in the past. So the thing that I like to say is that the financial statements from August will get more attention than the organization's strategic position. What's already been done in the financial statements, that's over and done. But you shouldn't be surprised if you have a strategic plan and a strategic roadmap that lets you know what's going to be happening in the organization going forward. So things are not a surprise if the board is fully aware of what the strategic position and strategic plan is of the organization. Rehashing, reviewing, redoing. This is something that's I see very frequently. It's really going over what the staff has already done. Again, there should not be any surprises. It should be in the plan. It should be something that's openly communicated. You shouldn't be talking about what the staff did in July and August. You should be talking about what they're going to be doing in September and October. It's a waste of your time, and it doesn't constitute leadership. Leaky accountability. This happens quite frequently and is really the death knell for many organizations. To have this accountability that goes around the executive director. And, I think this is an area where it's especially challenging when you have parents who are board members, so they're in the program, they're coming in, they're seeing what their kids are, they're, they know the teachers, they're probably friends with people. And that really kind of tends to have board members then go around the ED and judge the performance of staff that the executive director is responsible for. So I'm probably sure many of you can relate to that one. Clarity about their role. Again, this comes back to, if I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm going to do what I know. And so board members, because they aren't clear about their role, will frequently involve themselves in operational details that are not part of their job. Doing work of staff when not asked, jumping in and taking care of something when you haven't been asked to do it, you're really overstepping. And that doesn't mean that you can't volunteer for the organization. If there's a special event, you are volunteering for the organization. If you're on a committee that is considered a staff committee, and that varies from organization to organization, sometimes program committee is a staff committee, you can be part of that, but you have to understand that as part of that committee, you're volunteering and you are taking the direction from staff rather than the other way around. And all of these are just generalizations, but it's a slippery slope when the board starts getting involved in operational details. Okay, but having said all that, it's important to remember that your board members are volunteers. And, any volunteer can walk away. Well, staff can too, I suppose, but volunteers, are in a different category. You're doing it when not getting paid. And you really want board members to feel like they're engaged and useful and self-directed. And it's the responsibility of the board to help that happen. The board chair has a big role in playing in terms of making or helping board members feel like they are useful and needed on the board. And here we have the bullet about executive committees. If you don't include all board members in decision making, then they're marginalized and they lose interest. Anything that is discussed at a committee should be able to be discussed at the board. The board acts as one voice, it talks with one voice, and it can't do that if it doesn't know what decisions are being made. Board meetings are an opportunity to discuss board business. You're not talking, you're talking about where does the board's role, what does the board need to be paying attention to? And you can decide what that is. I mean, it could be that you decide that board business is looking at the financials every month. And so that's, that needs to be on the agenda. It could be that you decide that you want to talk about the executive director's report every month. And so that should be on the agenda. But what you probably don't have to talk about are, staff changes or programmatic changes that are being discussed at the staff level. You need to be able to separate what is your business as strategic thinkers and having a fiduciary role for this organization versus staff who are in the classroom, working with kids, figuring out how many diapers they have to buy or figuring out how they're going to be having healthy snacks. You don't need to be talking about that, I would put forward. You really need to be talking more about what's the external environment, where's this organization going, how can we remain sustainable, how can we make sure that board members are representing the organization in a way that we are in favor of. And so that's getting down to every board member having something to offer and recruiting board members who have something to offer. So I think you have to be very clear about who you're asking to be on the board and why you're asking them to be on the board. And then once they are on the board, making sure that you're then taking advantage of what they have to offer. And again, the chair or the president of the board plays a key role in all of this. So it's not a position to be taken lightly. If you decide you are the chair or you're being elected to the chair position, it's really, I think, the glue that holds the board together. And I'm sure many of you have had experiences working with boards where that just is fantastic, and it's because the chair is the one that's leading the organization, leading the board, working well with the executive director, and it really brings this very positive culture to the whole organization and to the board meetings. So now before we get into roles, any questions about that?
Yeah, I would like to, this is a perfect time for a question that came up earlier, how to recruit board members. So here's the dilemma that is common in early childhood education programs. We have families that join, then leave after 1 or 2 years when their child goes to kindergarten. We seem to have a difficult time getting community members to join. People seem to be so busy with their own lives and can't commit. Any helpful hints?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard in Vermont. It's, I think, because the population's small and people are busy. And I think it's a process, and you have to rely on people on the board helping you find other people to come onto the board. If you can advertise in the United Way, that's been a way that I've had success getting board members on organizations that I've been a part of. You can look at, grandparents, alumni. I think it's a lot of work, and the executive director and the board chair, if you have a governance committee, I would suggest you have a recruitment or governance committee whose responsibility it is to look for new board members. You need to do a survey of who's on your board and what skills they bring, so you can be focused and, go after someone and say, we really need your skill on this board, rather than we need another person on the board to meet our bylaw requirement. There's no easy answer. I'm sorry. There's no easy answer, except to be deliberate in who you're looking for and just keep at it. Just keep away at it.
I'm so sorry. And communicate that to any potential board members. I think that's one of the key pieces, is making sure that anybody who says, oh, I'd love to serve on your board, tell them what that's going to entail. What will they need to do? They're going to actually have to come to meetings. They're going to actually have to, play a role and be an active participant, and what that, sort of like how your board is structured. So communicate, give information.
Right.
I would also add that we are at a time where the community is really noting how important childcare is to the functioning of our state, our businesses, and organizations to be able to support their employees. And so this might be a time to encourage current board members to look broader in the community to business people or other folks in the community that don't necessarily have children within their childcare program, but are starting to begin to understand the importance of childcare within their community and recruit board members from there. And for that, I also go back to something that Jane said a little bit ago, which is making board members feel useful and important. And so you can't just recruit people and then plunk them on a board and then not give, as Brenda just said, be clear about what the role involves, and then make sure they're appreciated and given a role. I think we might be, and I'm not downplaying, Jane, I absolutely agree with you. It's always difficult to find board members, and no one really can. But I also think maybe we have a time where think broader than your small community of parents and grandparents.
I think that's absolutely true. And be sure you're prepared when you are recruiting people with, as Brenda said, a packet of information that outlines what the board's responsibilities are. If you're expecting the board members to actively engage in a fundraising event, you need to make that clear from the onset. Because if they say, I'm not doing any fundraising, then perhaps you don't want them on the board. So you need to be, as I said, deliberate about it and thoughtful about it, and really look high and far to find people that can serve on your board. It happens. It just takes a long time to really build it up so it's a board that people want to be on if you're in a position of really starting out.
And I found that when we're looking for a skill set, that helps us think about who we might approach, and is much more intentional than sort of like, we need another warm body. I have one more question. Do you have recommendations for board and committee sizes, as well as length of term of service?
Length of term of service for board members?
Yes.
Well, it should be outlined in your bylaws. I think that I like 3-year terms that can go on, maybe conserve, an unlimited number of 3-year terms, or 3 to 6 to 9-year terms. I mean, go repeat the 3-year term 3 times. I think it's really hard for boards that are trying to find members to think about people rotating off, but it's a really good thing for the organization. Officers should be elected every year. And committee size, probably more than 2. I know that many organizations that I work with, because the board's small and they have too many committees, it creates problems. So if you're finding that you don't have enough people on committees, you need to start thinking about the committees that you have. Do you have too many committees? Could you combine committees? Are they all necessary committees? So, think about that. Do you even need committees? Many organizations decide that they really don't need committees and that the entire board will talk about everything. So there's all these questions that you can ask yourselves as board members. Let's look at how we're doing things. Are we doing things the way that's best serving the organization and the members of the board? Is there a way that we can streamline things? Do we need to meet monthly? If we met every other month, would that give people an opportunity to be more involved in committees? So there are many different areas of that you can be thinking about.
And I would add a couple of things to this question as well. Excellent points, Jane. There can be, some committees have, many committees should have a beginning and an end date. Like, this is a committee to get this job done, but it's not a standing committee. So be clear about what kind of committee you're setting up. Like, sometimes what happens is people just keep adding committees instead of like thinking about, do they actually need another one, or do they need to sort of like reconfigure what they already have? And another thing about terms is, it's great if you can build your board so that your terms of coming on and going off are staggered. And one of the real benefits of having a 3-year cycle is that you have some institutional knowledge. So someone has a year to sort of, they have some time to get up to speed, and then they can carry that over for the new people coming on. So when your board members in year 3, they know what happened in the past 3 years, and they can help bring on the new board member. And so when you stagger it, you always have someone with institutional knowledge about, organizational knowledge.
Okay, I'm just looking that we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I have a section to get through. So are there other quick questions, or should we move on?
We're good, thank you.
Okay, so roles. What do boards do? Meet regularly, and that could be every other month, it could be every 6 weeks. You're required by law to meet once and have one annual meeting, but it really depends on how confident the staff is and how confident the board is and what needs to be going on. Provide, I said this already, advice and counsel. Set board policy. That's not staff policy, that's board policy. How is the board going to be operational? Bylaw changes need to be approved and determined by the board. With the staff, you're doing the mission and the vision. You're raising money. You're engaging in generative thinking and strategic planning. You are setting organizational performance measures, and that might be a good way to set the clear expectations for the ED's performance. If you don't set those expectations, how will the executive director know that she is meeting your expectations? Again, ambassadors in the community, deliberate, disagree, agree, and think together, and enjoy each other's company. If it's not fun to come to a board meeting, if you don't look forward to a board meeting, then you're going to lose people. If board meetings are contentious, if everybody's fighting all the time, without that sort of culture of let's disagree but come to some sort of consensus or come to an agreement, then you're going to lose people. People aren't going to want to come to the meeting. So these are really quickly sort of what boards should do, best practice. So board meetings then should be about the board's meeting rather than a management's meeting for the board. And what that means is you're not there just to hear the executive director talk. You're here to figure out or to talk about what the board is doing and what the board is thinking about the organization and thinking strategically about the future of the organizations. Well, the next bullet's kind of a repeat. Again, just to recap, they're not about reviewing the past, being entertained by staff, or helping staff do its work. So you really want to get to a point in your board meetings where you're talking about what's coming up, what's happening in the environment, what's happening coming down the road that you need to be paying attention to. Luann was talking about how people in the community now, people in the external environment are realizing the importance of childcare. COVID. So, you know, the board can be talking about what does that mean to us? How can we capitalize on the fact that people are now finally awakening to the fact that we are an important part of this community and an essential part of this community? You know, that's an interesting thing for the board to be talking about. And the executive director should always be at the board meetings. And if you have a business manager, that person is usually there as well. But you're not playing a central role. You're not there to be entertained by the executive director or to be told what to think or how to plan your meetings. In fact, I think the board chair should be setting the agenda. It should go, you know, the executive director should look at it and have input on it. But if your executive director is always setting the board meeting agenda, then you're probably going to be talking about what she wants you to talk about rather than what the board might be thinking about talking about. Board meetings should be more about long-term future than the present. And that's, you know, we've been talking about that through this past hour about how the board needs to be strategic and thinking forward. But of course, an exception is a crisis. If you're going to lose all your kids, you're not going to sit there and start talking about strategic planning. You know, the board can be really helpful in a crisis. And a good board will help the executive director through that crisis or help strategize solutions to that crisis. So, you know, if organizations come to me and say, we're thinking about having a strategic plan, and I look and every single month the board is putting out fires and the organization is barely holding itself together, it's really not the time to strategic plan. It's the time to put in some like concrete steps to move out of the current situation. But if there's not a crisis, then you really want a board to be thinking long-term. So the board's responsibility to the executive director, again, you have to be clear about what you expect. And that means that you have to meet with the executive director. You have to, you know, either a small committee, you know, ad hoc committee or a one-time committee of the board that gets together once a year to evaluate the ED. But you have to get together and tell the ED what you expect. You know, hopefully in a collaborative way, coming up with performance expectations for the executive director. Stay focused on the ends and let the executive director manage the means. That's the really hard part for a lot of board members. They want to get involved in the means. They want to get involved in what's going on in the classroom. But your role is to stay focused on the ends, on where the organization's headed. I'm sounding like a broken record. Support the executive director and again, provide advice and counsel. These are some repeats because it's so important that you are providing that advice when you're asked to provide it. You can certainly ask questions, but you are not there to tell the executive director how to do her job. You're there to be clear about what you expect from the executive director and then let that executive director do the job that she was hired to do. So the executive director leads the staff and manages the organization, manages the finances. So either you are, you know, doing payroll or sending it out, but the executive director is responsible for, if not the executive director herself, then somebody else in the organization, but the executive director is responsible for that, for the management of the finances. The executive director is responsible for the program development. Again, that might be an area that she will come to you, she or he, but I'm assuming it's mostly she's, will come to the board and say, you know, can you help me figure out this program? It's not quite working. And that's why you want people on your board that can lend you that expertise when it's lacking in the staff. Support the board and engage them in planning. So the ED does play an important role in making sure the board has what it needs to make decisions, has what it needs in order to effectively plan. And here, lead and manage fundraising with board support. And I know in a lot of small organizations, the ED just does not have time for that, but it is, as I said before, it's really something that it's got to be, staff has to be pretty strongly involved. And then implement the strategic plan if you have one. That is, it's the executive director's responsibility to make sure that the areas of the strategic plan that apply to the organization and the programs and staff are under the purview of the ED, and she is responsible for making sure they get implemented and then reporting that back to the board. Okay, oh, I forgot. Executive director is the single point of delegation for the board. And that gets back to the leaky accountability piece we talked about earlier. The ED is the only employee of the board. Oops, I guess that's the next one. So let's just put them all up there. The ED is created by the board. So you as the board are responsible for hiring the executive director. And you're also responsible, if need be, to letting the executive director go. But you are not responsible for hiring and firing any other staff. It could be that the ED will come to you and ask questions about whether somebody should be hired or fired, but it's not your responsibility. It's, again, that's the advice and counsel piece. The executive director is accountable for meeting the expectations for the board, responsible for supporting the board, but, and this is pretty important, is not accountable for what the board's job is or how well you do your job. It's not the ED's responsibility to make sure that you are a functioning board. Her life will be a lot easier if you are, but it's really the responsibility of the board to figure out how you can become a highly functioning board. And the executive director is responsible for the staff that she hires, supervises and evaluates. So at the end of the board can say, one of our expectations for you, executive director, is that you will do an annual evaluation of all staff members. And then it becomes the responsibility of the ED to do that. But you can set those expectations and then make sure that the executive director is reporting to you on meeting those expectations. But it doesn't mean that you're doing it. So the ED is responsible for hiring, training, and supervising, evaluating staff performance, creating a safe, accessible working environment, and within the boundaries of the budget, responsible for staff compensation. And these can all be, this can all be expectations that the board places on the executive director. We have this expectation that the working environment is going to be accessible. It's going to be within regulations. It's going, within your different areas. You can set those expectations and then let the executive director go and do her job. So what happens if all these great things that we've talked about really transpire? You'll find that board meetings really become interesting and strategic and collaborative, and board members are having really interesting conversations about what's going on in the external environment, and they're talking about what we can be doing in the next 6 months to really prepare for coming out of COVID or prepare for changes in policy. The executive director will support the board, but manage the operations. And then the meetings become about the future and not about reviewing the past, which is really when you know that you are firing on all cylinders, is when you really leave the board meeting and think, wow, that was exciting. We talked about things that we're going to be doing rather than thinking about things that we've already done. So I think that is, ask yourself, why did you join the board? Do you feel engaged, useful, and rewarded? So these are think that you should have this on the agenda perhaps for a board meeting, to ask your fellow board members, why did you join the board? What do you feel like you're offering? Or do you feel like you feel engaged? And if not, how can we talk among ourselves to figure out how to become more engaged? And that doesn't mean engaged in operations, it means engaged in strategic thinking, generative thinking about the organization. And then we talked about this before. Do you understand the mission? Do you understand what the organization's all about as a board? I have found in my experience, if the board doesn't really understand, where the funding's coming from or what the regulations are that the board is responsible for, it's going to start feeling like it doesn't have anything to do. It feels less engaged. They need to understand. That's why the orientation is so important. They need to understand what the organization's all about. Does the board think strategically, and are the meetings efficient and productive? So these are all good questions to ask yourselves as board members, and have conversation at board meetings about this, and try to think about ways that you can move towards being a board that understands and is strategic. And then I love this slide because I want us to bring back to our roots. You weren't formed so you could have good personnel policies. You were well governed, a good budget, purchasing practices. You were formed because there was a need in the community for this child care center. You were formed because people in the community were passionate about providing high quality child care. And so, that's the root of many nonprofit organizations. It comes out of the passion of people. It doesn't come, you weren't sitting around thinking, oh, let's start an organization so that we can, have personnel policies. So just remember that. And if I came on too strong, that's why I love the nonprofit sector, because these are our roots. Our roots are people who really care about people, care about the community, see a gap in services and want to get involved to filling that gap. And then as you go along, you start thinking about things that you need to be doing to make sure the infrastructure is there and that the staff are there, and moving through the life cycle. So next steps. I think we've talked a lot about helping you figure out agendas so that you can engage in these conversations. If you don't have a strategic plan and you think that you might be in a good position to start thinking that way, then think about creating a strategic plan. And then, if you don't have board policy that addresses the roles and the conflict of interest and the boundaries between staff and board, I would strongly suggest that you start talking about developing those policies. There could be a short-term committee to do the research and think about board policy, and start writing that. And then on the right side of this screen are some websites that I have found to be quite useful in terms of resources. And you can pull policies off, particularly the Minnesota one. You can pull a lot of their policies off their website that they freely share. They're a really fine organization. Compass Point has a lot of great articles on nonprofit organizations and some really helpful research on staff and on executive directors and board performance. And then Blue Avocado is I don't know if they still produce a newsletter, but they have really helpful little short, fun articles on operations and questions that nonprofits have. So, I think that's it. And we are like almost at time. So I'm sorry that I feel like I really crammed all this down your throats, but I'm hoping that you got something out of it, and that you can at this point really move forward as developing a board agenda that will prove itself to turn you into a more effective organization if you're not already there.
And I'd like to squeeze in 3 quick questions if we could. Maybe they're not really quick, but I'd like to at least address them. The first is, does the whole board hire and fire, or just the executive committee?
The whole board should yes, the whole board should hire and fire. The executive committee, if you're doing that, could play a role in screening applicants for the executive director position and then bringing the 2 finalists to the board. Yeah, I think the whole board should be pretty much involved in the executive director's hiring and firing.
And how do you feel, pros or cons, about co-directors? So speaking of programs, so a center has, say, co-directors.
I don't feel one way or the other about it. If it works for your organization, then great. If it's not working, then don't do it. That's kind of the way I feel about it. I see a lot of advantages in terms of scheduling and, being able to bring 2 different skill sets in. But I think sometimes there could be some problems. So I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I just think if it works for you, great.
And then the final question this evening is, what is your opinion about grant writing? And I know this comes up fairly regularly in my work. So should that be done by staff or board members or both?
That's a tough one because, I know that the staff have limited time to put into grant writing. It really should be a staff function, but I see many board members who have that time and willingness to do it. So it's done with a board member. I think it's fine if a board member does it. I think that, again, you have to make sure that the boundaries are there, so that if say the board member writes the grant is funded, that it then turns over to the staff to implement, to operationalize it, and the board member doesn't continue to be involved. So.
Thank you, Jane. Really happy that we had time to get to all the questions. And I know that there were some that folks might still have that you might think of in the coming weeks before we meet again. And please do hold them and send them to us. There will be ways for you to, you can reach out to us. And Luann is going to close us out. But Jane, I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, I look forward to the next one. I think that we'll be able to get into some of the detail and more questions. And please, if you're coming to the next one, and maybe Luann's going to say this, but you know, if you can send me some questions in advance, and I'll make sure that we cover certain, I'll, you know, put together a presentation that covers those.
Thank you. So Jane, there will be the staff members who do not identify as board members on this registration will be automatically signed up for the October 6th. There will be a link. I think Maria is going to put it in the box, and she's already got it in the chat box right now, for folks to sign up. If you were not here tonight and you have colleagues that were not here tonight and are interested, they can sign up. The one on October 6th will be directed towards staff, executive directors, leaders, more than the board staff relationship that we focused on tonight. Jane, this was amazing. So much information. No need to apologize for the amount of it, because first of all, these women and men who are on this call are smart, quick learners, and this is how they operate, and we'll give them the PowerPoint afterwards so they can look back at it. Thank you to both of you. Thanks, Maria, for keeping us going, and thanks to all of you on the call. We hope to see many of you on October 6th, and you can always reach out to Brenda and myself, Luann, at letsgrowkids.org, any questions that you might have. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.